And what they found was that things like cartilage were readily fermentable and sort of equivalent to fructooligosaccharides, so FOS and inulin type, prebiotic type fibres. So they sort of kicked off the work quite early on, and then we sort of came into this quite a bit later in terms of understanding, I guess, that circularity of ingredients, looking at how we could reduce waste coming out of abattoirs.
Welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast, powered by Wisenetics, your trusted source for the cutting-edge science and insights driving the global pet food industry forward. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Shevler, professor of companion animal nutrition at the University of Guelph. I have a rich background in comparative animal nutrition and 2 decades of experience working alongside industry partners. My focus is on turning rigorous science into real-world applications that improve pet health and advance product innovation. Whether you're a nutritionist, a product developer, a marketer, a veterinarian, or a decision maker in the pet food space, this podcast is your go-to for staying competitive and informed. From emerging research and regulatory shifts to ingredient innovation and sustainability trends, we cover what matters. So let's dive into today's episode and explore how science is shaping the future of pet nutrition, specifically as it focuses around animal fibers. For today's podcast, we have Dr. Emma Bermingham joining us. Emma is a seasoned expert in pet nutrition and gut health with over 15 years of research and industry experience across New Zealand and internationally. She earned her PhD in animal science from Massey University and held prestigious postdoctoral positions, including a stint at the renowned Waltham Center for Pet Nutrition. Emma's passion is translating rigorous scientific findings into actionable strategies for pet food manufacturers, ingredient suppliers, and regulatory stakeholders. Through Ember Consulting, she partners with industry leaders to optimize product formulation, enhance dietary interventions, and integrate cutting-edge nutritional science into commercial solutions. An accomplished researcher and communicator, Emma has published extensively on dietary drivers of gut health and palatability in dogs and cats. She's known for blending deep technical knowledge with pragmatic real-world application, empowering brands to elevate pet well-being and market competitiveness. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you, Kate. That was a lovely introduction.
Well, and I also know that you're rather humble, so I enjoyed making you during the introduction, maybe a little bit.
Thank you.
So I'm really excited about today because I think so often we assume that fiber is coming from plant sources. And indeed, I would say for humans, that is largely the case. But in the case of dogs and cats, there are also animal-derived fermentable substrates. So why don't you just start with telling people what animal-derived fermentable substrates are?
Okay, so this is a phrase that we sort of settled on because we were trying to talk about the parts of an animal carcass, whether it's a beef carcass or a lamb carcass or a rabbit carcass, and in the concept or the vein of the components of the animal that could actually be fermented in a fiber-like manner. So this work, I think, really started with Depore and her colleagues at Ghent University, excuse my pronunciation there, where they were looking at the fermentation of rabbit carcasses in cheetah inoculum. And I think it was really around sort of understanding nutrition for cheetahs at the time. And what they observed was that actually things like collagen in an in vitro system and using cheetah inoculum, and we can come back to why those sorts of things are important later. And what they found was that things like cartilage were readily fermentable and sort of equivalent to fructooligosaccharides, so FOS and inulin type, prebiotic type fibers. So they sort of kicked off the work quite early on, and then we sort of came into this quite a bit later in terms of understanding, I guess, that circularity of ingredients, looking at how we could reduce waste coming out of abattoirs, and with this notion that in the wild, cats and dogs will consume a little bit of plant fibre in terms of grass, and dogs perhaps a bit more scavenging around fruits and things. But actually, in the large part, they seem to do quite well from eating carcasses. So, yeah, that's sort of how we got onto it. So really, the fibre thing is a little bit, can be a little bit like a red rag to a bull to the purists. So we settled on fermentable substrates with the view that they would act in a fibre-like manner.
Benefits consumers want, partnerships you need. Schooler is your all-in-one partner for an innovative pet food supply. With an expansive portfolio and global access, we can source and deliver in-demand ingredients year-round. Schooler provides access to ingredients that are animal and marine ingredients, nutrient-rich, clean label, plant-based, freeze-dried, sustainable, MSC and Marin Trust certified, and more. That means you can offer on-trend products consumers want without disrupting production. Learn about the benefits of working with Schooler. Visit schooler.com/pet. That's SCOULAR.com/pet.
So when dogs and cats, and you can differentiate them if that is the case as well, when they consume animal fiber, then how is it differentially fermented in contrast to plant fiber? Maybe that's a good place to start as well.
Yeah, so basically these are protein-like tissues, so they can include collagens, they can include skin, hides, even animal hair. So we know from the in vitro work that we've done that there's actually a relatively good fermentation profile from cat fur itself. So when the cat grooms, actually that does seem to be able to be fermented in an in vitro system. And so the idea is that these tissues are ingested, broken down into proteins and peptides, and those protein and peptides themselves are fermented into short-chain fatty acids such as propionate and butyrate. So when we typically think of short-chain fatty acid production, we do tend to think about the pathways involved that come from the carbohydrate sources, so the sort of lactate sources. But actually, there are a number of pathways for butyrate and propionate that actually have amino acids as their sort of starting block, if you like. So, yeah. So basically, the animal, the microbiome of the cat and dog is able to utilize these amino acids and proteins, peptides, and through different pathways ferment those into the short-chain fatty acids we need. So I think in terms of the role of animal-derived fermentable substrates in a fibre-like manner, it's probably more like the prebiotic fibres that we would feed our cats and dogs for that sort of short-chain fatty acid production, rather than using them for the bulking approach that we need for digestive flow and appropriate gut motility and things like that.
Okay, interesting. So does that also mean then, Emma, that you see, so if you were to increase the fermentable animal fibers in the diet, would you see a shift in the microbiome as well?
Yes, we do. Yeah, so we do see an increase in the microbiome, or the microbiome that can utilize proteins and amino acids. So Fusobacterium, Clostridium species, Peptostreptococcus. So there's a range of naturally present microbes in the gut that are actually able to use these use proteins as substrates for fermentation. Yeah, they tend to be the smaller groups, but certainly they're there and they're switched on, ready for action. What we did note was, or a couple of interesting things, that that when we've added these fermentable substrates into inocula that have come from animals fed high protein diets already. So the microbiome seems to be very switched on to be able to use those. So if you're going to use them in a dietary sense or in a formulation, they would probably make better sense to be used in diets that have high protein already, because the microbiome is then adapted to really use them very well. But if they're going into maybe an extruded diet where there's more carbohydrate source, the microbiome isn't as primed to use them. So there is an effective diet, we think, and certainly the dog and the cat on similar diets also have different fermentation profiles. So it's not as simple as put it in and replace. It's really about thinking about your diets, what you're trying to achieve with them, and how these ingredients can I guess add functionality to your diets in that instance. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's a really interesting point. And I can't help but think you used kibble to talk about high protein and low protein, but what about when we think about moving between different formats? So when we're advising on the inclusion of, I'm just going to put it in kind of air quotes because we can talk about fibers across the board. Would you change whether you're using a plant-based fiber or an animal-based fiber among kind of the most classic formats? So you kind of already touched on kibble with low protein and high protein, but what about wet? And what about raw in this case?
Yeah, so certainly these types of ingredients are better suited from a functional, manufacturing functional point of view in the sort of wet diets and the raw or freeze-dried or air-dried type of diets. And because of their nature, they're not, if you imagine, you've got your protein, animal protein stream coming into a kibble line, you want it to be very homogeneous, and so it comes in and it gets mixed in and baked. But these substrates tend to be more fibrous in terms of they're quite stringy, and so they do lend themselves to be used or incorporated better in those sort of wet or formats where homogeneity isn't quite as important. So, yeah, that's definitely the observation I've had over the period here.
Okay, so if any of our listeners were interested in exploring fermentable animal fibers, who is supplying these substrates? What kind of ingredients are we looking at? Do they have approvals as well to be included in dog and cat diets?
Yeah, so they're effectively co-products out of the red meat industry. So we're thinking of collagens, cartilages, tendons. Of course, some of those ingredients have, depending on your market, have quite high value in terms of human food production. And so when we were assessing a range of these ingredients, we sort of looked at the ones that, from a New Zealand perspective at least, do have very high human value, so that is tendon. But we also looked at things like mechanically deboned meat, MDM. I think it's called something else in the US, but it's basically the the meat that comes off the bones when it's been pressed. We looked at the bone cake, which is the bone residue. We've looked at lung tissue because that's also really, really nutritious, but also quite fibrous in terms of its physical structure. And like I said before, hair, wool fibers, skin, hides. We've looked at different fractions of those. So in terms of their regulatory use, they're off the animal carcass. There shouldn't be too much of an issue there, as long as, of course, they've passed all the food safety and standard checks that you'd expect of anything coming out of a red meat processor. So, yeah. Really good way of sort of utilising the whole carcass and making the red meat, component of pet food more sustainable. And I would assume it would be the same for chicken co-products and fish co-products as well. It's really about thinking how can we minimise waste, and actually these types of products have. This role as a fermentable substrate, but also they're really high in different amino acids and also fats, so they provide that nutritional functionality into your products as well.
Can you comment maybe a little bit? I can definitely speak to this in Canada, that there is quite a bit of interest in funding for specifically hides. It tends to be one of the co-products, one of the very few co-products coming out of animal of the meat sector that is used in another way. So this is a potential outlet for unused hides as well that is underutilized. And so I can't imagine that's just Canada that's interested in that. It must be more universal, US, New Zealand, Australia, probably South America, with the amount of cattle produced there as well.
Yes, that's right. So certainly a massive issue here in New Zealand with not only the beef industry, but also the lamb industry, the sheep industry as well. So we've taken a couple of approaches to investigating how we can use the hide or the pelt, and I guess the thing that we've got to consider is everything we sort of do to the hide or the pelt to not necessarily make it edible, but make it make it to the point where it can be incorporated into a pet food really easily, will add cost to the ingredient. So while you're starting off with a co-product or a raw product that has relatively low value, to get to maximise its nutritional flexibility, if you like, that does cost money. But in the first instance, hydrolyzing the proteins seems to work well, and some of the hydrolyzed proteins that we've tested do appear to have nutritional and or fermentable functionality. You could there's different layers to the skin and the hide, and certainly separation of those components leads itself to using those different components. But of course, this is time, and if you've got really, really, really sharp knives, you can just chop it really, really finely and add it in. Again, that will suit more of a wet type product than a kibble type product. So when you're thinking about how do you utilize it, it's sort of what end products are you hoping to get it into as well. So
yeah, interesting. Definitely a great consideration for multiple parts of the pet food industry to think about adding further sustainability measures, and maybe our friends at the Pet Sustainability Council are also start listening to this and think about that. I think it's a great avenue. So what are next steps here, Emma? What is the information that we are lacking that could really facilitate fermentable animal fibers coming in to the pet food industry in a larger quantity?
Yep, so animal-derived fermentable substrates. So I think we've done some initial testing. We've done a little bit in vitro systems using different types of inoculum coming from either an extruded diet or with high in carbohydrate versus wet diets, which are higher in protein. We see there's differences in the fermentation profile there. We see differences between cats and dogs, often we're sort of doing quite simple research. So we're either doing an in vitro system, which of course is a good starting point, but it doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening in the animal. And then as soon as we go into the animal, we have complications where it's quite hard to tease out what's going on, because we can measure a short chain fatty acid, but it's a spot in time. It's not necessarily reflective of the that biological process that's going on. The work I've seen and the work we've done has largely been done in cats, because we've been able to collaborate with Massey University, and they've got an amazing cat colony there that we've been able to use. I haven't seen a lot done in dogs in terms of actual animal studies. So of course, I'm a scientist and like to see evidence. So of course, seeing good, robust animal data is important. I wouldn't think there's too much of a safety concern per se in terms of using these ingredients, because they are from animals, but certainly understanding how they might interact in terms of fecal output and things like that. These are proteins, they're highly digestible, and so we do see really improved depending on where you sit on the spectrum, but certainly firmer stools coming out of both cats and dogs, and just understanding how what the impact or implication of that could be in different animal and animal subclasses in terms of senior pets, for example, or kittens. So there is a lot more work that needs to be done, I think. But certainly from a nutritional point of view, they're providing an opportunity for, or providing proteins and amino acids, extra proteins and amino acids, in some cases fats into the diet. They're able to be fermented, so they're having some sort of nutritional benefit, and that sustainability story is obviously really, really key in today's pet world, right? So really good opportunities going forward, but as always, work needed just to get those. I think just optimizing for your specific diet if you're a pet food manufacturer.
Absolutely. And maybe just this has really got me thinking a little bit about just ecological feeding as well, because I think that the consumer often thinks about raw food, which can often just be muscle and organ tissue and doesn't include other parts of the animal. I can't help but wonder whether there would additionally be some kind of behavioral benefit to including these. Do you have any insights on that? Would it in fact be a welfare benefit to the dog and cat to also be able to consume these parts of the animal, whether fermented or not?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So certainly there was and one that's been is quite pivotal here in New Zealand, because what we don't want is our cats eating native birds. But some research that came out of the UK, where they showed that including raw food into the diet reduced animals, cats, predating, is that the word? And I had a discussion with a colleague in France, and she was saying that actually when cats eat raw food, they chew differently. So they chew more to their sides. And so it's potentially that this chewing behavior is linking back into the brain and having some sort of interaction with the brain so that it feels full, or it feels content, or it feels like the cat, it feels like it's caught its prey, if you like. So I think there's some real opportunity to add these types of co-products into the diet. You're right, for nutritional, everything else, but also that chewing function. We know wet foods are very good from a nutritional point of view and a water content point of view, but they're soft and can cause dental issues if the animal isn't given anything else to sort of eat. So I think playing around with the length of the fibre, hide or animal fibre going in is a really good opportunity for that sort of, if you think about a dental health type of diet. And yeah, maybe that whole your animal feels like it's being an animal again. There, we've got a marketing line there.
If we want to keep cats as our pets, and we look at kind of how we approach feeding all the other animals, we work quite a bit in horses, and we spend the most of our time with horse owners talking about feeding your horse the way that it needs to be fed to be happy. And when it's happy, it's also healthy. That's a wild simplification of it. But I think similarly about dog and cat, how we can kind of enhance that. And we have feeding puzzles and things like that, but it doesn't address the substrate issue. And that substrate goes beyond nutritional content. It goes on with how do you ingest it. Is really important. So I think that's really neat. Well, I really think you've solidified, at least in me, Emma, that I might want to actually start looking at an output for some hides here in Canada and see if cats are good. So I will reach out to you on that research project among many others.
It's time for our famous three.
At the end, I always like to ask a few different questions that aren't necessarily related, but could be related to the topic on hand. So when we think about these products that you've been talking about, so I'm going to bring it back to the animal-derived fermentable substrates, is there an ingredient that you haven't had that fits in this category that you haven't had enough time to talk about during our conversation already that you'd like to mention?
I am a bit of a fan of bone cake. It sounds really strange. So it's when at the abattoir, and this is obviously a very layperson perspective of what they do. They cut off all the good meat for the humans. Then they, which is great, and then they have these big bones that still have a lot of meat and fibrous tissue connected to them. They put them into machines that squish them, and we get a really good functional, mechanically deboned meat that comes off one side. And then we have our bone cake that's left on the other, which is basically large chips of bone, which has been sort of pushed together. And it's got some really interesting if you look at it from a not a chemical point of view, but maybe a nutrient point of view, it's got some really interesting different types of nutrients. There's still a lot of collagen attached, obviously calcium and phosphorus, and other minerals that are associated with bone. So that's probably one of the ingredients I really try when I'm talking to people in the meat industry, get them to sort of think about a bit better and how can they make that more accessible to the pet food industry, because obviously it can be quite fragmented, and how can you process it in a better way so that it can be more easily utilized. So that's probably my I won't say it keeps me up at night, but sometimes it does.
All right. Well, bone cake, everyone. Just remember that. Consider some bone cake.
Bone cake, bone chip. It's called different things in different markets. But yeah, so anyway.
What was the second one? Bone chip?
Bone chip, yeah.
Interesting. I don't know what it's called in Canada.
CHIP with my Kiwi accent, not chop, chip.
I'll have to inquire. I'll get back, send you an email what they call it here. Okay. Second question. What nutritional supplement do you recommend most often? So if I was to whittle this down, you can't just say a vitamin premix. Is there a specific nutrient, and I'm going to go with micronutrient here, that you talk most to about pet food companies about considering that they have not?
So certainly there's, when I'm talking to pet food industries, a lot of the time we sort of at that macronutrient, I tell them not to be frightened of fat. Fat is our friend, especially for dogs. But in terms of micronutrients, the one that does keep me pondering is zinc, because it's really hard to find natural sources of zinc. Oysters are the holy grail, but oysters are very expensive. And so it's where can we find natural sources of zinc? And then it's sort of, our cats and dogs as they were evolving, they didn't eat a lot of oysters. So I think that whole kind of question around, they've obviously got a requirement for it, but where has it come from in an evolutionary point of view? So zinc is the one we always end up having very long discussions about, because it's incredibly important, but it's very hard to find natural sources of zinc that don't have to be coming out of oysters being shucked and stuff. So yeah.
Okay, interesting. And last question, favorite famous animal of yours?
I didn't have a favorite famous animal, but my favorite animals are our working dogs on New Zealand farms. They are just the bomb. They go forever. My dog is a retired working dog, and the work that they do running up and down these hills is just phenomenal. So they're probably my favourite type of animal, but I couldn't think of anyone in particular that was famous in terms of,
Really love the working dogs as well. So I'd like to end off with giving you the opportunity to talk about Ember Consulting and how people could get a hold of you if they would like to reach out and have you as a consultant.
Oh, thank you. So I Ember Consultancy, so emma.bermingham@gmail.com is the best way of getting a hold of me, or having a look through LinkedIn. I'm available to help. I really enjoy working with pet food companies to sort of understand where they're going, what their nutritional strategies are, and then how we can formulate good products to get them to where they want to be. So that's what I do, and what I really enjoy. I have a passion for cats, so that tends to come through in a lot of the conversations I have. But certainly, really interested in that, really trying to help usually smaller pet food companies really think about where they're going right from the start. So what they're trying to achieve, and getting them the best scientific evidence to really help them achieve that. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, I can attest, not as someone who's reached out for an industrial consultancy, but I had the privilege and honor of working with Emma while she was at Ag Research, and I couldn't be more elated to call you my colleague and friend, Emma. You do spectacular work. So please reach out to her. Fantastic consultant. So with that, thank you so much, Emma, for joining us today. And that concludes another episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, presented to you by Wisenetics. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review because your feedback is invaluable. Until next time, this is Kate Shevler signing off from the Pet Food Science Podcast.